Hey, everybody. Welcome to Scratch Claw Push. This is 0.1. It's our first pre-episode, would you call it? Our first bonus episode where it's sort of a meet the creators thing. So I'm going to interview Brandon, and then we're going to have another episode with him interviewing me. And so you'll get to hear kind of about our background, how we ended up doing this podcast, and we're going to keep these short because the other ones are a bit longer. So, all right. Welcome, Brandon.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And so because we've done this with all of our other guests, let's see. So Brandon and I met because he is a producer, writer. What else would actually, let me do this. So we've done this with all of our other guests. Give us 1 minute rundown of your curriculum vitae. Is that how you say that?
I believe so. Just let me know when the clock.
All right, and you have 1 minute.
Hello, I'm Brandon Duke. I am originally from Jackson, Georgia, which is now famous for being the town square of Hawkins, Indiana, in Stranger Things. After graduating college, I moved to Atlanta and I started working in TV, which I did for 20 years. Along the way, I worked in short film projects on the side, and in 2016, I founded Karkata Media to help artists, craftsmen, and other people around Atlanta, get their own, help them get their message out and help tell the world about, all the creative, talented people we have in Atlanta. In 2017, I founded the Garfield's Crossing project with a few other writers, one of them being Clayton Romero, who in 2018, we founded Novus Opera, another production company to run Garfield's Crossing, and that focuses more on fictional storytelling. And from doing that, I met Billy Joe Cones, doing the auditions for the Garfield's Crossing podcast, and here we are. Look at that.
Right on. Good job. You're the first person to get it right on out of like 7 people, right?
So, yeah, that's 20 years of working in television. I could just feel that minute.
Yeah. And I could feel you feeling it. You're like, oh, I know I have time, but how much? But you got it right.
I know. I could tell when I was coming to the end of it. It's like, okay, I got to, you start your TV brain starts kicking in. You're like, wrap it up.
Cool. Well, yeah. So it sounds like you got a lot of stuff going on to get you here. And so the point of this whole podcast is to sort of explore people who are clawing out a space for their own creativity and creating opportunities. And that's something you've definitely done, because that's how we met. Was you and Clayton created an opportunity for this podcast with a full cast of actors playing all the parts.
A very full cast.
Very full cast. A lot of people. So was, what is your background before all of this? Like, how did you end up doing this? Were you tell us about young Brandon.
Oh, well, I actually started out wanting to be a musician. I started playing guitar when I was 14 years old, and up until I was about 20, and I was in my second year in college, I started having some issues in college and ended up having to go home for a while and work. And while I was doing that, the only job I could find was in the meat department of a grocery store. And these are, of course, this is in a small southern town, and I don't even know, sure these people had even heard of OSHA. But I was back there working with a lot of loud saws and other machines, and ended up getting tinnitus. So like getting a scorching case of tinnitus when you're 20 kind of brings your musical career to a halt, a screeching halt. So at that point I realized I couldn't play in a band, and I was told my ears were permanently damaged at the time. I still have tinnitus to this day, but during that time when I was, of course, very depressed, I watched a lot of movies and started getting into the whole idea of filmmaking and writing, because I think Quentin Tarantino was kind of big at the time. There was a lot of other, the late 90s, kind of early 2000s. You had a lot of brand new directors out there, kind of your writers and directors doing, new stuff and kind of making these exciting new films. And that's kind of what I got into. So I ended up going back to college at Georgia Southern University and I was trying to find some way to get into that, and I was directed to go get a degree in communication arts, which is they didn't have a film major, but I could get some I could get some broadcasting classes, and I could do some theater classes. So I figured that's a pretty good way to kind of balance. I could, if get out of school, go work in television, which I did, and also kind of learn some of the get kind of deep dive in some of the theatrical stuff, and kind of learn more, kind of do the same. You're kind of basically kind of pulling from each discipline to try and aim towards my goal, which is to be a filmmaker, and learning to work with actors and write scripts and how to film things and edit and all that stuff. And so basically cobbled that together, got my degree. I minored in writing, and then I came to Atlanta with a bunch of friends from college, and soon thereafter got my first TV gig at a place called the Gym Shopping Network, which is at the time was like a little mom and pop version of QVC. It's gotten quite bigger since then. I think they're still out there now, and probably a lot bigger. They even got spoofed on South Park, so that's kind of like where they're at, if you want to know like how big they've gotten.
Wow.
And the spoof is shockingly accurate. If I can go find it and put it up there, I know I worked with the guy that they spoofed. He came on right before I left. So, interesting side note, but yeah. So doing the TV thing, I was working in the area called Master Control. So there's not a lot of creativity going on there. You're kind of, someone compare that job to being kind of like a truck driver. You don't grow anything. You don't make anything. You're just getting it where it needs to go.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just kind of shepherding all that content, onto the airwaves and getting them into people's homes. But you do get to watch a lot of stuff and study a lot of stuff. So I've watched more commercials and more television than anybody probably should have been allowed to.
So you were there, you were doing that. Were you in the same job for the 20 years you were there, or you said 20 years, right?
I worked 2 years at Gym Shopping Network, and then I worked for Turner Broadcasting for about 18 and a half years, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. So yeah, that was, and when I was at Turner, I did a lot of live broadcasting, did a lot of sports, a lot of NBA games, soccer games. If pretty much I worked in almost every network up there at one point, from Cartoon Network to TCM, TBS, doing baseball, NBA TV. I did Court TV. I actually was, when Turner got Court TV, they brought it, when they launched it here in Atlanta, I was doing Master Control for a lot of the like murder trials and stuff they would show. Really uplifting stuff.
Was that during was it the Casey Anthony one?
Yes, we did cover that one while I was there. That was yeah. That was something else.
I lived with my ex and his family, and his dad was obsessed with the Casey Anthony trial, so it was on every single day. So I actually know more about that one than most of them.
Yeah, it's that's a whole other podcast. Let me tell you that you see a lot there, and you kind of learn a lot about the legal system. Some things you almost wish you didn't know, because you see some stuff. You're like, what? They let that guy off,
right?
Or that girl, whatever. I mean, it's interesting. It's definitely a learning experience. But yeah, did that. And I was doing short film stuff on the side. I did a lot of I did several entries to the 48-hour film festival with different teams. Made some short films, some that were good and others that were really not good.
So when you did that, what role were you filling, or what roles, I guess? Because usually if you're in the 48, you're probably doing more than one thing.
Yeah, like I would do, I think I wrote a few of them. For about 3 out of the 4, I think I was listed as a writer. But of course, I'd also do, like you're doing like PA stuff, or, set dressing, or, holding a boom mic, just kind of whatever was needed. It's, not much different than today. I'm just kind of whatever. If I need it done and I can't afford to pay someone, I have to learn how to do it myself. And which has become a theme on the show, because it seems there's a lot of that going around these days.
Yeah. I definitely noticed that as we talk to everybody. We got a lot of, I would not say jack of all trades, master of none. I feel like it's more like a Renaissance man woman type of situation where, right? Would you say that's true?
Yeah,
Place
I
you're
think
in?
that's definitely become the thing, especially nowadays, because I've noticed so many people out there. Um, I mean, on one hand, like it's great because we've got all these different platforms that we can create content for, and it's probably gotten cheaper to do video and audio than probably ever in history. You know, nowadays, like we all have our phones. When you phones have got like an HD camera on them, you can
Mm-hmm.
buy a pod. You can buy a what you call it, a tripod for pretty cheap. You can record audio. I mean, like it's your ability to make stuff nowadays has gotten pretty cost effective. It's also why there's so many podcasts, because they're relatively easy to make and pretty cheap to produce, as long as you're not doing anything too fancy. Um,
Yeah, they're just a lot of work, as we're finding out. I mean, as
yes,
I'm finding out.
yeah. Well, it's just making like a million little decisions, which is, I mean, you kind of get used to that. I mean, that's also just kind of anybody these days getting into the content creator game. You suddenly having to realize you're also your own marketing department, you're your own PR department. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have to make all the you realize that, oh wait, I have to make all these graphics and these backgrounds
Mm-hmm.
that are that I'm going to need for my channel. They're not just going to magically appear out of the ether. So someone has to do that. And like at a TV station where I'd
Mm-hmm.
work, there would be like a graphics department, or there'd be, someone filming the talent, or someone miking them up. Even just in the studio, every little thing, everybody has a specific job. But when you're at this level, you're doing all of that on your own. Now you've got to learn, like what mics to get, or how to light your room or whatever, or you've got to mix your own audio or edit your own video. It's I mean, on one hand, it's an excuse to learn a lot, and you can develop a pretty broad range of skills. But it can also be really exhausting and sometimes just overwhelming, because you think, I have all this stuff to do. Oh God! So
Yeah. I also you just made me realize that my audio might be a little weird in the beginning of this because I didn't close this.
that's okay. We'll fix it. We'll fix it in post.
Fix it in post. Um, I like to leave the door open whenever possible because it does get stuffy in here, um, but yeah. Uh, so let's see. What else did I want to ask you? So one thing. So you mentioned the job that led to your tinnitus, which sounds awful. Would you say that is the worst job? Because we were talking about asking people what was the worst job they ever had. Was that your worst job, or do you have another one that's
I
up
would
there?
say that would tie for my worst job next with selling women's shoes at JCPenney. It was the first job I had when I moved to Atlanta, and it is that I would watch some of the calmest, coolest guys I've ever met go into the back room and scream because of what they had to deal with out of the customers for that. A lot of the jokes I got at the time was like, oh, you're like Al Bundy on Married with Children, though thankfully I was single at the time.
Mm.
But you realize a lot of those jokes from that show are very true to life. Like a lot of the stories he tells about the things that certain women do when they're shopping for shoes, that's kind of accurate, and it's not fun.
um, yeah, that does not sound like fun. Was so when you first moved to Atlanta, what was your did you come here with a job already, or you said you got that job when you got here? So,
I no, I didn't come with a job. I didn't even do like an internship, which a lot of people in my particular area of college did. I just came up to Atlanta with my group of friends, and I was literally just cold calling people. Like I would go back in the back when we still had phone books, just looking up everybody that was offering every video company in Metro Atlanta, and just calling like 4 or 5 of them a day and saying, hey, do you guys have any openings? And thankfully the job I did get was because one of my roommates had gotten a job as a operator, a phone operator for gym shopping, and she says, hey, these people, they need some help, so why don't you come put in your resume? And of course, because I mean, it was not a terrible, it was not so much as difficult in the sense that you had to already know a lot of stuff because they were willing to teach you everything, but the actual learning the stuff and then having to actually do the job, which is more so just kind of like keeping up with the pace of the whoever the hosts are, because if they start ripping through like sales, it's not just doing what you do, it's having to do it very, very fast. And then you're also having to, we'd have to change setups from one show to another, like with only like 5 minutes. And you're literally having to grab everything and haul it from one. It was all in like one room. It looked like an abandoned church. So you're grabbing it from one side of the room, rolling it to the other while you're balancing shots. It's like literally like a two-person crew, maybe three if you were really lucky. One
Wow.
person in the booth kind of switching everything, and another person on the floor managing the cameras and kind of talking to the host and kind of being like the go-between, even though you could actually shout out of the booth and still talk to the host, but it didn't always sound good. So you try not to do that if you didn't have to.
Wow. That sounds like circus-y.
Very much so. It got a little crazy from time to time, and also like you never would know like what would be thrown at you. They could come in there and say, "Okay, we're about to do an art show," like later tonight, and suddenly you're having to figure out how to light it while you're still running the other show. Like, they'll put something, put an item on there, let it spin on the table, and then you go run back across the room and have to figure out how you can light all these framed pictures so they're not glaring back at the camera with their glass frames.
Mm.
Or, you're trying to light something that like with using very old lights and also lighting it for a camera that at the time was probably older than I was, or at least almost as old as I was. So using very suboptimal equipment or very old equipment, and then having to just kind of do a lot of stuff on the fly. So it's very much kind of like a trial by fire situation.
Those sound like the type of skills that would come in handy later, though, because, like, I know for me, part of the fun of working on certain creative projects is the trial and error, is the problem solving stuff. And it might not always feel fun in the moment, there's that stress that you get. But like my roommate Max decided to enter this 30-second horror movie competition. And he enlisted Shannon and I to help him with that. And so we shot for 2 days for a 30-second horror movie, just to get the shots we needed and, do all the stuff. And it was just a lot of like, we don't have film equipment. We were filming it on phones. We were using, making little trick shots with my roller skate. We were doing all sorts of things, using the cat tree to put lights on to get like a certain effect. And, all we're using is like self-tape lights, basically. But a lot of that, I was doing the boom mic while I was doing the lighting effects. I was doing the set dressing for my room. And, Shannon was kind of director, Max is kind of actor. I mean, it was chaos for like 2 days.
Yeah, sounds very familiar. It was, there's a lot of that, especially I think when you're starting out, because you don't have a lot of money. You haven't like met a bunch of people to like invest in your work and give you all these give you the money to actually hire people.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to like figure stuff out. And but it's also like it's a good thing because it kind of forces you, it forces you into, I guess the biggest thing that I've found is, in far as like producing, whether it's either podcasts or it's filmmaking, is like really a lot of being a producer is just being a good problem solver.
Yeah.
And just figuring things out, because a lot of it is, you can have some very basic equipment. You have just enough to kind of get it done, but that also, that's just the starting point. There's, from A to Z, there's a whole lot of letters in between, and, every letter represents a new problem. So it's, you're having to constantly, work around something or maybe do something different than your this grand plan in your head was, because you're like, oh wait, this piece of equipment can't do ABC, and now I need to find a way to get it without having what would be ideal. But again, that's also kind of like you see like throughout history, that's also been how like a lot of creative things have been done. I mean, famously, you got the idea like in Jaws where you don't see the shark till the very end, because it turns out, and when they were filming it, the shark didn't work that great. But it
Mm.
also made the movie better because you kind of had this, almost not quite subliminal, but just you're forced to kind of use your imagination for the shark for so much of the movie. So it actually kind of creates this psychological effect. And again,
Yeah.
that was just Spielberg and the editors just deciding, okay, we're just not going to show the thing until we absolutely have to. And it worked.
That's a good point, that so often we think like, oh, well, if I only had the money to do X, Y, or Z, this would be better. And that's not always true, because so often it's the creativity that comes out of our limitations that actually makes something way better and way more interesting than if we'd just been given, all this budget. Um,
Yeah, I mean, look at some of the big Hollywood blockbusters that bomb. Like there's movies out there that have no shortage of money behind them and still somehow don't get it done. And then
mm-hmm,
there's other movies, excuse me. And then there's other movies. You get someone like a Blair Witch Project. They just come up with like a really cool premise, and they
mm-hmm.
give them like the most basic cameras and just send these three actors out in the woods and have them just ad lib a bunch of stuff, but they kind of push them in a certain direction to go along with this story they came up with. And what comes out is like groundbreaking and
Yeah.
influenced like an entire genre of horror films for like the next, 10, 20 years.
Did you see Host?
The Korean movie?
No, it's a horror movie that was done entirely over Zoom during the pandemic.
I did not, but I've heard of stuff like that. I know there's a couple. There's that Missing, and then there's another one. There's a couple of movies that look like they were done all through, like social media screens and like
Mm-hmm.
Zoom meetings and FaceTime calls. So that's become a thing too.
Yeah. I
I'm
mean,
not
it was.
surprised.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm not surprised it's out there. What were you going to say?
I was going to say it goes back to the idea of working within the limitations that you have. So, like during the pandemic, wanting to create, and these people went, okay, what do we have? We have our cell phones. We might have a camera or two, and very, very basic setups. And it's all like the premise is they're having a pandemic Zoom, what do you call, seance. So, doing a seance with this woman over Zoom, and it leads to bad things because it's a horror movie. But
Of
it
course.
was so well done, and all the people went on to. I mean, none of them really had a big resume before, but all of them have gotten attention from it, which is really great because it's like, hey, you created something that was good with very limited resources, and that to me is super interesting, way more interesting than a giant budget movie, for
Yeah.
sure.
Even there's a show on Apple called Mythic Quest
Ah,
where
yeah.
they actually, if you remember, they did that one episode that was during the middle of the pandemic where everybody's just on Zoom, and they made a whole like thing about it where they were trying to, everybody had their own little thing, and they were making this kind of Rube Goldberg type of machine. And it
Mm-hmm.
was all just seeing if they could actually pull it off, and everybody kind of in their own place. And it's a really fun episode, and it's you can see again, trying to overcome those limitations sometimes can lead you to bigger and better things than say a giant budget behind you
Yeah,
can.
and that led to a funny ongoing gag with F. Murray Abraham as a giant head on a computer screen being wheeled around the office on a rolly chair even after that, which was just great.
Yes.
Yeah.
So boomers and technology, it's always fun. Sorry to dunk on any of the boomers we have listening, but
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it's again, stuff like that. It's sometimes really your own, you learn that your limitation really is not always the physical, tools that you're working with. Sometimes it's just your creativity.
Mm.
I mean, granted, that sometimes the tools and the software definitely make it a lot easier, but yeah.
So
There-
in your own work, what limitation can you think of a time when a limitation has actually led to something way better?
Yeah, actually one specifically when I did my first video, I didn't actually have an electric guitar and I needed to make music for it, but I did have Rock Band, not Rock Band, excuse me, Garage Band. Rock Band's a video game. I had Garage Band on my Apple computer that I was using to edit, so I would use that to record.
Mm.
And I was basically playing an acoustic guitar and filtering it through whatever distortion or preset thing was already in Rock Band. I keep calling it Rock Band. It's Garage Band. I was basically using the presets of Garage Band to get the distorted electric guitar sound that I needed, but I was doing it all playing my acoustic. And using two acoustic guitars, I managed to get what I thought at the time was like the perfect distortion sound that I have never been able to get with an electric guitar sound to this day. Like, I wish I could just go to some tech genius and say, make me a pedal that makes this sound.
Mm-hmm.
And it was literally just me tweaking it on Garage Band. It's actually, it sounds like I'm playing electric, but I'm not. It's just an acoustic guitar filtered through like whatever, British metal, preset is on GarageBand, and it sounds, to this day, I just go, wow, it was the first one I did, and I'm still trying to go, how do I get it to sound that good? Considering like at the time I didn't even have, now you can see I've got a few electric guitars, I've got an amp and a pedal and all that, and I still have not been able to recreate that sound. It bugs me in the best way.
That's a great example. I was going to say when we did that little short, one of the cool things that we did was, we didn't have any special lights, and we didn't have, we maybe could have done some effects in post, but like none of us have those skills either. So everything was very much just practical. And like I said, we had a cat tree to put one clamp light on. And then I had a dish pan, like a roasting pan with a shallow roasting pan with water in it, sitting on one of the shelves. And I was literally taking like one of those cat toys and making waves in the water with one hand while holding the boom mic, I think between my knees and something else, and then doing something. I had like a couple things. I think I was flickering something else. And so we had all of that going on, and it led to like this cool watery effect so that the ghost character had like a wavery thing. And, just you do with what you got, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite podcasts is out there is one called Song Exploder. And I love, or I like, sometimes some of the coolest sounds will come from someone playing something wrong intentionally. And they go, oh, that sounds really cool. Now let me take that and then tweak it, or let me, now program it into a keyboard where I can make that sound at every musical pitch, stuff like that. Or you think about like sound design for movies, the famous sound for, the lightsabers in Star Wars, I think is someone striking like the metal wires that hold up the electrical poles or that are connected to like the
that makes so much sense.
And it's basically someone just striking it with like a wire or something. It's something it's very, very simple, but your ear doesn't, it's not a sound you would just kind of think, oh, that action is going to make that sound. And your brain doesn't always, it's something like when you hear it, your brain kind of puts it together to just match whatever the image is. It's also like when you see people like breaking celery to imitate like a punch or a broken bone or something like that. Again, I love stuff like that where it's just something that's seemingly coming out of left field. And it's something very obviously like, celery is not terribly expensive. At least it didn't used to be before, inflation started doing its thing. But anyway, like, again, it's cheap, simple stuff that you can do that, gives you a lot of bang for your buck.
Well, is there anything else you want to say? Where can we find you? How can we follow whatever you're doing besides this podcast?
You can find me on most of the social medias. On Twitter at Brandon Duke ATL. You can also follow my work at Karkata Media or at Novus Opera. There's also Garfield's Crossing that has its own social media accounts. That's kind of on hold at the moment. We're looking to hopefully kick that off and get it out. Hopefully this fall. We're supposed to already have it out, a long time ago. But hey, if Tom Cruise has to wait 2 years to release Top Gun, I don't feel so bad about having to hold Garfield's Crossing back for a little while. And then now at Scratch Claw Push. So,
all right,
all the things.
All the things. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure being your co-host.
Back at you. That will be all for this episode. To keep up with the show, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Scratch Claw Push. If social media isn't your thing, you can contact us at scratchclawpush@gmail.com. This podcast has been a Karkata Media production. For a full list of our podcasts, go to karkatamedia.com/podcasts. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for use of brief quotations and review. Copyright 2023 by Karkata Media, LLC. All rights reserved.